Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this first installment of Stones of Faerûn. I'm Windy J. I'm the DM for this particular game, and this game is set in the Forgotten Realms. For those of you who are not familiar with all this Dungeons and Dragons stuff that I seem to have gotten myself into quite a bit, the idea of Dungeons and Dragons is that you can have a whole bunch of characters, and they're very malleable, and you can role play them out and put them into some pretty unusual circumstances and see what happens. So the way that this game works is we're set in a world called the Forgotten Realms, or a universe, I should say, that's called the Forgotten Realms. In particular, the planet that this is set on, the material plane this is set on, is in the planet Toril, uh, and the continent is Faerûn, and the region inside that continent that we're talking about is the Moon Sea. So it's kind of this parallel universe, if you will, to Earth. There are some other settings, including Eberron or Ravnica, which is the same as the Magic the Gathering card, but this one we're set in is the Forgotten Realms. And this particular game, called the Stones of Faerûn, is played by some people from all over North America, from coast to coast. And we play them on Tuesday nights at 6:30 Mountain Standard Time. That's just going to be the location at the time that we do it. We won't do it every week. We do it on average every 3 weeks. Might actually increase, who knows? But that's kind of the schedule at any rate. And so before we got into the point of streaming the games that we do live, which we will be doing, I thought some people might be interested in seeing a little bit about what the game is set up to be like. So, Forgotten Realms. So, Faerûn is this large continent that has kind of a fairly significant inland sea, kind of spiders across the center of the continent. And it is in the northern end of that spidered off section of the inland sea that we're set up in, with a large lake called the Moon Sea. And at the very northern, mostly northern coast of the Moon Sea is a community called Flan. Flan's had quite a bad history over the past couple of 100 years, and so that's the community that our characters themselves find themselves in. And so we have 6 different groups in our adventuring party. We've only played a few sessions so far, so you haven't missed out on a ton of storyline, but I'm going to give you a little bit of those details right now. And the first thing I think I need to do is introduce you to those characters. So our first character that I'm going to introduce you to is Emery. Emery Castlemanis. I'm pretty certain I'm not saying that properly. So this is Emery right in here. And what you see here are the statistics that they have, to kind of the idea, the character traits, the abilities that the characters have. And so this is Emery Castlemanis. Emery is a moon elf, and he is roguish in nature. Now we are now at level 2. We of course started the game at level 1, but we're at level 2, and you can see this is kind of how we see Emery. Emery's got a relatively standard speed. He's a pretty tough person, and I guess I should be careful about that too, because Emery, although he leans to he also uses they them pronouns, and so use either one quite comfortably according to Emery. He's a fairly smart individual, pretty good with knives and blades and anything that's pretty small. He's also pretty a stealthy dude. And for those of you who are not familiar with what the word passive wisdom is, just kind of how easily you just notice things that kicking around beside you. That's basically Emery in a nutshell. Now, Emery has actually had a couple of interactions in this game already. Emery is just over, well, in elf years is kind of odd, because elves age differently than humans. And so they also have different ways of interacting with other elves in their history, including having past lives and such. And that's kind of a normal elf thing. And so Emery experiences dreams, but he experiences dreams. The thing that's interesting about Emery is he experiences dreams differently than every other elf. So he has had a dream that is slightly unusual, and he's quite curious about. But that's about this point in time that all the information that we can provide, without giving too many spoilers away for anybody else. So the dream that he has had, he will likely share with the other characters during the middle of our live streams, and so we'll leave that to Emery to explore and to share with you as you watch the games as well. The next character that we're going to introduce you to is Lumina. Now, Lumina is a human, and relatively normal to see humans and elves interacting with each other in Faerûn. What is interesting about Lumina is a little bit about her backstory. All we know at this point in time is that she unexpectedly arrived in the Flan area, in the Moonsea area. Now, Lumina was not always here. She was on the what we call the Sword Coast, which is if you were to try and take Toril and Earth and try to find the parallels, that Faerûn would kind of be like the Europe Africa kind of area ish. It's not exact, but ish. And if that's the case, then the Sword Coast would be a lot the European slash African coast along the Atlantic Ocean. But it's not the same. It's a completely different planet. So, but Lumina comes from an island country off of the coast called Lanton, and somehow managed to find her way out thousands of miles away in Flan. And so that's kind of where Lumina is. Lumina looks, let's see if I can get that set up for you here. Yeah, let's get Lumina's statistics up so you can take a peek at those guys. There you go. So this is Lumina in a nutshell. We have seen her do some spell casting and a little bit of an understanding as to where that ability to do some spell casting comes from is somewhere in her background. She's got some draconic ancestry, and so how that looks is completely different from person to person. She's quite a charismatic, and we've actually seen her help out with some of the unique interactions where some characters have to talk to other people in the game and convince them to do certain things, and so that's become quite useful that she's been able to be persuasive, and she hasn't been very deceptive recently, but you never know. Anything could possibly happen in the game. So that is our next character, Lumina. There is no necessary order I'm going through these characters in. It's mostly alphabetical, honestly, which brings me after L to the letter M. And so we now have our newest character, Marisol. Now, Marisol is from Melvont, which is on the other side of the Moonsea. And interesting for Marisol is that she didn't come into the campaign right at the very beginning, that she was actually rescued by the rest of the team. I'll kind of give you that story in just a little bit, but we can have a peek at, first of all, at who Marisol is. Marisol is interesting because she is a half-orc. And so that means that she has at least one parent, or somewhere in her lineage she's had a parent or grandparent or what have you that was probably human, and that the other parent was was orc. So eventually that gets passed down the bloodline, and this is now Marisol de Avila. She is fairly strong, fairly dexterous. She doesn't now the intelligence of 0. That's not necessarily what we're looking at. If you look at the bottom numbers, that kind of gives you an idea as to what the intelligence of an individual is. The bottom numbers are, if it's a 10, that's pretty much average intelligence. You get down to the minuses, and that's to the lower numbers lower than 10. Then that it shows to you kind of the effect that can have. So as an example, Marisol has a score of 8 in charisma. Now, that means that she is less likely to be very good at deceiving people. She's also less likely to be very persuasive. And there's a few other things that can happen in there too, but whenever we determine, and we use dice to determine whether or not she is able to succeed at deceiving somebody, or able to succeed at persuading somebody, we take that dice number, we -1, and that kind of tells us whether or not she's successful. And so she is very definitely not adept at charisma or anything charismatic, but she's pretty good across the board everywhere else, and she's got an average intelligence. So that's Marisol's character. And to be clear, this is the characters. These are not the actual people playing them. And the people who are playing them, they're going to keep their names to themselves. It's just the characters that you guys are going to end up meeting as you're watching these games. And so that's Marisol from Melvont, if you will. Now, the next character is a particularly unique character. I'm really excited about having this one in. This character's name is Nightingale. And Nightingale is a Kenku, which is basically they're humanoid, much like an elf or a dwarf or a half-orc, but this particular humanoid is a bird-like creature. And in particular, one of the aspects of this particular bird-like creature is that they don't have the ability to necessarily do a lot of conversational language. They tend to do mimicking language. So they will only say something if they've heard somebody else say it before. And so a lot of times nightingales had to try and commune with nature, generally speaking, although that's not entirely true, but has a connection to magic by way of that. Now, in this particular case, nightingales mostly influenced by the moon, and you find about how that affects her throughout the game as well. She seems to be pretty tough, though, with a hit point currently of 18. That's a fairly strong one for the most part, and she's also above average and pretty close to everything else. She is among our most perceptive people in the group, and that is, you can see that from her passive wisdom. She's going to be more likely to see things randomly on the streets and notice things that are out of place and such. So, and she's also pretty tough. That she's pretty able to move around quickly and not get damaged too much. Now, Nightingale is also quite the interesting character in that she likes to connect with one other person and kind of hang out with them and protected by them. But at the same time, she's got some pretty good strength all on her own. She doesn't really need a whole heck of a lot of extra help, and yet there she is. Interesting for Nightingale, she's also particularly good at finding certain things too. So in this last session, she found a pyrite coin with the visage of a god known as Waukean. And something to keep in the back of your head with Faerûn is that it's not just a singular god entity by any stretch. It's actually a pantheon, a huge number of different gods, and each god has a different realm. There's a god called of the moon, who is known as Faerûn, and so Nightingale will very likely be heavily influenced by Faerûn. But there's plenty of other gods. There's gods of war, there's gods of strategy, there's gods of love and peace and beauty, there's gods for dwarves, there's gods for elves, and so on and so forth. There's tons of gods out there, and the interesting thing is how each of these different creatures, each of these different people interact, whether they actually even have a religion to begin with, but when they do have a religion, how they interact with each other based upon their gods. And so there we go. That's Nightingale next. Next character up is Roman. Roman is another very interesting race of characters, if you will. Roman is what's called an Aasimar. In particular, he's a protector Aasimar. And so as an Aasimar, that basically means that you have descended from some sort of celestial or godlike being. And so there's something about your presentation, your physical presentation, that you can see is most definitely divine in nature. It could be wings, could be a halo, could just be particularly glowing skin or something along those lines. We haven't really discovered a lot about what Roman's physical characteristics are that allows us to see that he's an Aasimar, except that, and mainly the reason for that is because Roman has been covering himself up a lot. He wears a cloak, wears full-length clothes with all sorts of bracers and such to make sure that his physical appearance isn't particularly noticeable. The characters have kind of picked up on the fact that he is not your average human, that he is some sort of celestial descent, but that's pretty much it. And we haven't really learned a lot about Roman's background quite yet. What we do know about Roman, though, is that he's had a dream. And the nature of that dream is kind of interesting. In particular, with a spoiler challenge that we have here, in that some of the characters haven't learned what this dream is like, chances are this dream has had some sort of impact from either his god that he has as a cleric, or perhaps it's from his patron that will bestow upon him some extra magic, which makes him into a warlock. And in particular, a celestial warlock. Some sort of celestial will be his patron that gives him powers to be able to do things. And so the Roman, we don't necessarily know what that looks like yet, because we've only had a couple of sessions to flesh that out, but we do know that that is exactly that there's something interesting that's going to be happening there. What that interesting thing is, I guess we have to tune in to find out a little bit more. We do have one last character. That last character's name is Tippin. Tippin Duffelson. Now, that is suggesting, of course, that Tippin is the son of a fellow by the name of Duffel. Tippin hails from an area just north of the Moonsea called the Ride. If you actually travel a little bit north of the Moonsea, you have to pass the Dragonspine Mountains, and just on the other side of the Dragonspine Mountains is the Ride. It's kind of this large open plain, and he descends from a tribe of horse people, horse masters, if you will. And Tippin is a human barbarian. And so with a barbarian, you can assume that he's going to be a fairly tough dude, and sure enough, he is. You can see that in his hit point maximum. He's a fairly strong dude. He's been able to put that strength to the test a couple of times by tackling different people and knocking them out, or slicing some people by way of a great axe or something to that effect. Great sword, I think it was actually. But he's also not exactly a dumb barbarian. He's actually fairly average in terms of intelligence. He's right on top of things. So Tippin is actually the character that is that we can actually kind of show off what's going on here. That Tippin actually is involved in the next campaign or next stage in the game by way of having been the first to enter a crypt. And so this is about what they know about the crypt at this point in time. There's not a whole heck of a lot that Tippin has just kind of dove straight in, and none of the other characters have had a chance to catch up. So this is as much as they know about what's going to happen in the next game. That brings us now back to the storyline that we've had so far inside the game. And the storyline basically goes like this. We've started off by meeting at a tavern. Very common trope in D&D, and we'll just have to deal with it. But they meet in a tavern called Madame Fiona's Tea Kettle. Madame Fiona and her 5 daughters, they're all halflings. They run this tea kettle. It's a fairly nice establishment. Nothing really weird usually happens here. These are young adventurers. They haven't done a lot of work yet, but they're kind of looking for some work for a variety of reasons. They could be looking for work because they want to get back home, because they just want to make some money to be able to do their own thing, or because they're actually being called to do so by some sort of deity or god or something to that effect. So they're all in Flan. They all happen in the tea kettle at the same time, and they all end up getting hired at for their first job by this strange spy person who called himself a harper. Gives them a job to try to plant this little symbol on, or this little pin on a person during a seedy exchange at a barn outside of the town or of the city of Flan. And so they do. They go out to this barn. They make contact with this merchant that they're supposed to be selling this item for, paying for this item. They were given tools to be able to do that kind of thing, but they were also supposed to try to get this little pin on there. They ended up getting interrupted by a bunch of thieves that were also in the barn saying, hey, we actually want that, not you, you don't get it. And so they had to kind of deal with the thieves. They had to still try to get the pin on the merchants to try it anyway, and they were successful in doing all of that. But now they know about the Thieves Guild that lives in Flan and works in Flan. They called the Welcomers, and so they're kind of being aware of just how dangerous the city of Flan can be. The next day, they actually end up getting yet another job, if you will, but not one that was where they were sought out for. It actually turned out that while they were at the kettle, they had this this lady came screaming down into the streets of Flan, and they could hear her from inside the tavern, carrying this baby, crying about how her family had been abducted, and abducted by goblins, no less. And so at this point in time, the party includes Emery, Lumina, Nightingale, Roman, and Tippin. And so the 5 of them go to try to recover this family that was actually a farming family. They farmed out peat out north of the city of Flan. And so they follow the trail of tracks left behind by goblins from this farm, and they find themselves at a cave. The interesting thing about that is that the cave, when they arrive at the cave, it's not just goblins there, that there's actually a human speaking to the goblins there too. And the human just magically disappeared. So eventually they decide, okay, we better get in there because chances are, if there's a place where they're going to be, where all these farmers and their farm hands are going to be, they're going to be inside this cave. And so they work their way through the cave, dispatching just a few goblins and actually a wolf as well along the way. Wolves are sometimes trained by goblins for their own purposes, so not a big surprise, and a couple of bugbears. Bugbears are a little bit beefier looking creatures, if you will, than your standard goblin, but they tend to interact with goblins quite a bit. And in doing so, they were able to save not only the farmer and the sons, but also all of the farm hands that work there, and the character Marisol. Now, how Marisol came to this and came to being a prisoner of these goblins hasn't been fully dealt with yet, except for the idea that she was just looking around and got captured. And so the any other details about how Marisol even got there, the rest of the party doesn't really know, except for to say that they know that she is from Melvond, that somehow she managed to get captured and held by the goblins that way. So we probably will learn a little bit more about Marisol's backstory now that the characters have finally met her and they're starting to interact a little bit more with each other. Now that was the second thing that happened to this crew. The third thing that happened to this crew was back at Madame Fiona's tavern after they had already saved these people. They went shopping in Flam, bought a few things, got some healing potions, those are kind of important. And then in Madame Fiona's tea kettle, while they were settling down for an evening dinner, a half-orc walked into the tea kettle looking a little bit nervous, came and approached Roman in particular. Not entirely certain why it was Roman that it was approached, but he was approached, and he said, "I'm from the Emerald Enclave, and I've been given word that there's something particularly dangerous here in this tea kettle. Can you please help me flesh it out?" basically. And throughout the course of the evening, there was some the players worked their way around the tables of the tea kettle to meet some strange new people, and in the process of doing so, they accidentally well, first of all, Nightingale actually finds that pyrite coin sitting underneath the table of one of the other people that were patronizing the tea kettle. And as she goes to do so, she runs into this person's pack, and you hear a glass break, and suddenly this guy's experiencing some form of electric shock. So now they got to try and figure out what's going on. They realize he's holding on to something in his hand. And then before long, a lightning bolt shoots out from him and goes to a different person in the tea kettle. They never really figured out why this lightning bolt chose this other person. They actually didn't mind it so much because the other person was a food critic, who was a little bit on the rude side. So, but that's beside the point. The point was that they had to try and solve this riddle as to why this lightning bolt was jumping around and how it even got here in the first place. So Tippin happens to no, it wasn't Tim. It was Rowan who actually ended up getting the lightning bolt back into this gem that was actually being held by the original person who had it in their pack. And then through a course of an interrogation, they learned that this gem was nobody really knew how it got here and how it was what it really was. They were supposed to be some sort of an exchange because they thought this gem was going to make it easier to make swords and such, but obviously that wasn't the case. And so they managed to get this gem back. The half-orc from the Emerald Enclave took it so that they could deal with it properly, and they brought the tea kettle back to some safety, which is interesting because the tea kettle is usually quite the quiet place to begin with in terms of taverns. At any rate, it's this safe haven in Flan that Madame Fiona's kept. So the very next day, we get our group of six now, all working together, it seems, and the six of them get approached by a fellow by the name of Brother Keefe. Brother Keefe is a priest of Kelemvor being a god of death, but not necessarily god of death as in like we're going to make sure that everybody dies, so much as it is just protecting those who are dead and those souls who have passed on from being back from undeath and things like to undeath and such like that. So really trying to honor the dead, if you will. And that's what Kelemvor was all about, and that's what Brother Keefe is about. So Brother Keefe discovered, or was told, that one of the crypts in the graveyard in Flan, called the Valangan Graveyard, what belonged potentially, and he wanted to confirm this was the issue. He thought that it might actually have belonged to a polymorphed dragon of some sort named Xandria Weltran. And so he asked these six our adventurers to go to Valingen Graveyard and to check out the crypt and to prove or disprove that Xandria was indeed a dragon at some point in time. And in the court so far, what we have learned is that the sarcophagus that was in the crypt did in fact have some bones in it that weren't humanoid, they are more draconic in nature. And they were able to also, after a trap almost kind of suffocated them, but they were able to discover that there was a secret passage under the sarcophagus. And that is where we have gotten ourselves to now. And that's Tippin just started diving in, and that's where the last session ended. And so our next session being December 8th, that's going to be the day that we have our first session, first live stream of the Stones of Faerûn, including all of our characters, Emery, Lumina, Marisol, Nightingale, Roman, and Tippin. And we're going to see what happens when they go into that crypt. We might also learn a little bit more about who these creatures are, who these characters are, and a little bit more about their backstories that they haven't had a chance to even talk to each other a whole lot yet to discover who one another are. And so that might be something that happens here soon. There are other things that some of these characters have kind of gotten interested in. There's lots of other people who are also going to come and say hello, I'm sure, as well. It is Flan. It is a city with lots of characters of disrepute, if you will. And so there's plenty of opportunities for strange occurrences to happen here. Welcome to Stones of Faerûn. The campaign has only just begun. You can join us on December 8th at 6:30 Mountain Standard Time. And that pretty much brings us to a close for our lovely little intro. Hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you, and have a great one.